The Addams Family Chronicles continue. Chapter 20. A Roll of Nickels. A roll of nickels represented a fortune to a 10-year-old boy back in 1971, especially when his weekly allowance was 15 cents, earned only after completing his day-to-day chores, including everything from taking out trash, feeding pets, yard work, and keeping his room clean. Yet a roll of nickels was what his mother had promised him. All he had to do was keep his mouth shut and behave. The Addams household was a fairly mobile unit, having been a lot of places in and around Oklahoma and Arkansas. There was even a stretch in the late 50s and early 60s when they had lived in Michigan and California. But after hearing Dad announce that the family would be spending July in Naples, Florida on vacation, the thought of another boring summer doing yard work in a windswept, sun-baked southern Oklahoma town dissolved into fanciful visions of sun-kissed, sandy beaches lined with palm trees, gently swaying in a tropical breeze. It was to be a vacation like none before it, and as the day of departure approached, enthusiasm was the rule. The journey to Naples would take 4 days and would be attempted in a 1970 Pontiac Catalina. Of course, the prospect of a 1,500-mile drive with 4 children struck terror in Mom, as she was well acquainted with the issues of managing children on road trips. Just traveling a few miles to the market with the children was known to be fraught with any number of conflicts between them. So, Mom ruminated on how she might control the children's behavior for the trip, and at the same time, make it fun and enjoyable adventure for all of them. After much contemplation, the proposal was tendered. "I have 4 rolls of nickels," she said, extending them in her hand for all the children to see. They were fresh from the bank in crispy rolled paper sleeves. "Each one of you now owns a roll of nickels. It is yours to spend the way you like. However, you will not take possession of your roll until we get to our destination." The puzzled look on the children's faces demanded further explanation. "Here's the deal. Each time you act up in any way, whether it be for fighting, being too loud, complaining, or being unruly, I will take one of your nickels away, and then it will be mine." Although she was addressing the 4 of them, her pointed glance in young Eric's direction spoke volumes as to whom this deal was proffered, for young Eric was a spirited child. Lynn, at 16, was really no longer in need of much correction and could conduct himself properly. Keith, at 13, was typically not a troublemaker, and little Alicia, at 6, was a sweet little princess. "When we get to Florida, you get to keep whatever money you have left. I want this to be a fun vacation for all of us, so please behave yourselves, and maybe you will have some money to spend." Now, a roll of nickels didn't seem like much to Lynn, because he already had a job at the local Burgerland making $1.50 an hour. But Mom knew she didn't really have to worry about Lynn acting up. But to the younger children, it was a lot of money. And young Eric was already thinking of things he could buy with his money. Ice cream? Candy bars? Bubble gum? Was Mom crazy? Young Eric couldn't believe his good fortune. It would have taken him all summer long to earn $2 from his allowance. But in a matter of 3 or 4 days, the money would be his, just for behaving himself. How much easier could this get? Daybreak of the big trip was upon them. Dad always liked getting started early. Maybe it was just because he was excited as the rest of the family. The Pontiac was loaded with suitcases, swimming trunks, snorkels, and beach towels. An ice chest with bologna sandwiches, Kool-Aid, and beer was the last thing stuffed into the trunk before departure. Young Eric had his new Guinness Book of World Records with him, as well as a little notebook with which he could record the names of all the towns through which they would pass on their journey. Energy was high. The family piled into the sedan, but before the car even left the driveway, a conflict arose. "Keith, you sat on my book and wrinkled it." Young Eric shoved Keith off of his book and rescued it from further abuse. Eric, now suddenly silent, looked up to the front seat where Mom sat in judgment of his outburst, assessing whether his actions warranted a 5-cent penalty. It was the perfect opportunity for Mom to show how the system worked, and with a bit of smugness in her voice, she pronounced sentence. "Okay, Eric lost a nickel." She deftly took out the roll of nickels with Eric's name on it, plucked one from the wrapper, and put it into the inner pocket of her purse. Young Eric opened his mouth to object, but with the first word, Mom cut her eyes toward him menacingly, squelching his challenge as quickly as it had arisen. All he could do was bow his angry red face to his ruffled book and pretend to read, compelled to obedience by the solace of knowing that he was still heir to $1.95, yet troubled by the knowledge that his puissant mother was custodian of his fortune. The car backed out and the trip began in silence. By the time they crossed the Red River into Texas, the cabin of the Pontiac was bright from the early morning sun. The drone of the highway was dominant as each of the children were engrossed in their own activities. Keith was reading some scary comic book, while Alicia was busy dressing up her doll. Young Eric, next to the window, squinted through the sunbeams at his record book, learning that the tallest man in the history of the world, at 8 feet 11 inches, was Robert Wadlow Pershing, who died at age 22. Lynn stared blankly at the passing scenery from his window seat, as his fantasies vacillated from basketball to cheerleaders to his girlfriend, Joanne Anthony, and back to basketball again. Lynn was a pretty good athlete and often dreamed of scenarios where he might hit the winning shot for his team. His reverie deepened as his teammates hoisted him up on their shoulders, the announcers at courtside going nuts with excitement. The next day's headlines of the local newspaper would read in 3.5-inch bold letters, "Adams does it again." And as the satisfied smile on his face had almost evolved into a chuckle, reality broke through in the form of another complaint from young Eric. "Mom, the sun is too bright." He whined loudly with his exasperation, eliciting another 5-cent penalty from his mother, who lifted her sunglasses as she dug into her purse for the roll of coins. "That's not fair." Young Eric objected violently, figuring that he better get his nickels worth. "I'm the one sitting in the sun. Everyone else is in the shade." Eric's argument was not even considered because of the tone he had taken with his mother. His anger was apparent, but good sense dictated a cessation of hostility. Let's see. 1 nickel for complaining about the sun, and another nickel for sassing me." Mom was resolute in her conviction of young Eric's behavior. "Next time, you will think twice about back-talking to me." Eric threw himself back against his seat angrily, prompting a giggle from Keith, who was sitting next to him. This only proved to incite young Eric, whose temper was legendary in the Adams household. He flung a backhanded jab into Keith's chest, causing Keith to retaliate with a reciprocal blow of his own, only to be blocked by young Eric's expectant defenses. The car began to slow and stopped on the side of the road. This was very bad news for the two of them, because they knew that the next voice to be heard would be Dad's. "You two, get out of the car." Dad's sonorous voice filled the car with fear and apprehension. The boys knew the routine. The doors opened and the two of them stepped from the car onto the shoulder of the highway, with Dad following behind them in silence. As they stepped to the rear of the car, the boys could hear the dreaded sound of Dad's belt being freed from his trousers. "Line up." Hands on the car. Traffic was speeding by as Dad doubled up his belt to deliver 3 swift strokes to the backsides of each of the boys. Dad was always temperate in his delivery of physical punishment, as he was a strong man. But it always hurt. And in addition, the embarrassment of this spectacle being carried out in front of the world made it hurt that much more. As the last swat was imparted, an old man driving by in his pickup slowed momentarily before smiling and driving on his way. Now get back in the car and keep your mouth shut. Dad meant business. Young Eric wasn't sure how many nickels were taken from his roll, but his anguish was tempered knowing that Keith no longer had his full contingent of nickels either. The miles that followed were filled with activities Mom felt might ease the tension brought on by Eric's outburst. The family played games that families play to pass the time while cooped up in a vehicle. First, they played the ABC game, where the letters were spied in alphabetical order from passing billboards. Then, someone would pick out a famous person and call out the initials, while everyone else would ask questions and try to guess who they were thinking about. Then, the family would sing familiar songs, everything from Woody Guthrie to songs that were taught in vacation Bible school. But after a while, an inquisitive Eric blurted, "When are we going to get there?" Another nickel was relinquished. He was getting used to it by now, and the prospect of spending money while in Florida was becoming a distant pipe dream. Over the course of the 3-day journey to Florida, the family would enjoy lots of new places. They would visit 10 states along the way, including national parks, such as the Great Smoky Mountains on the Tennessee-North Carolina border and the Everglades in Florida. There would be picnics at roadside picnic tables underneath sprawling, moss-covered live oak trees in Mississippi and beneath coconut-laden palms in Florida. And along the way, squabbles would erupt and nickels would be confiscated. And throughout the whole stay in Naples, there would be fun at the beach, visits to jungles, and fun at poolside at the hotel, the Cove Inn. There would be sunsets to enjoy and seashells to cherish as keepsakes. They would make new friends during their stay, none more enticing than 2 young teenage girls who would steal young Keith's heart. The family would make for themselves memories to be treasured for a lifetime. No one remembers how many nickels were left over to spend. No one, that is, except for young Eric. He remembers exactly how many nickels were left. While he watched the other children receive and spend their nearly complete rolls of nickels, all that was left for him out of his roll were 3 measly soiled nickels, 15 cents. The same as his weekly allowance that he earned by mowing, cleaning, and helping around the house. So, as he walked to the vending machine on the first floor and fed his 15 cents into the coin slot, he pulled the lever underneath the Fifth Avenue candy bar and wondered whether it was better to earn his money by hard work or receive his money as part of a reward. The answer came loud and clear. His eyes welled with tears of unfulfilled expectation. No candy bar came out, and he no longer had 15 cents. The machine had taken his money and given him nothing in return but a story to tell decades later. Chapter 21: How to Win Friends and Influence People. The summer of 1971 marked a milestone for Mom and Dad. It had been 20 years since they graduated from high school. Mom had graduated from Ozark High School in Arkansas. Though she had been a good student, her brother Ron, less than 1 year her senior, was valedictorian of the class of 1951. Dad attended Poto High School in eastern Oklahoma, a much bigger school. To hear him tell it, he graduated first in his class too. This was really not due to his grades, however, but rather to fate. His last name began with A, and therefore he was first in line to walk across the stage and receive his diploma, just in front of Sarah Adkins. Dad had also been quite popular among his classmates, so it was understandable that Dad was excited to be attending his 20-year reunion in August. The trip to Poto would take over 4 hours and would offer the four Adams children and their parents a lesson in courtesy on the American interstate system. Lynn was 16 years old. He had been driving legally for over a year, though he had been allowed to drive on the farm roads of Oklahoma when he was much younger. Once, he was 10 or 11, Dad was teaching him to drive the family Impala sedan on the dirt roads around the farm. When he turned through the gates that led to the house, he turned too soon and ended up putting a scrape down the whole side of the car, eliciting an angry reaction from his father. But now he was much older and a good driver. So it was decided that Lynn would drive the family to Poto, much to his delight, though the scrutiny of his father's watchful eye upon him seemed to provoke cautious trepidation in his driving behavior. Much of the journey would take place on Interstate 40, a new, controlled access highway that expedited travel more safely. It is here that our story unfolds. The family spirits were high as they embarked. They began singing songs and playing trivia games to keep themselves occupied. Dad, who had experience teaching driver's education, offered Lynn advice along the way. Put on your left blinker, look over your left shoulder, and proceed with caution when safe to do so. He spoke with clarity and calmness, matter-of-factly, as if reading from a driver's education manual. Remain in the right lane. The left lane is for passing. The sign says, "Slower traffic, keep right." He gestured at a diamond-shaped yellow sign on the side of the interstate. The speed limit is 65 miles per hour, Dad said, pointing at a white speed limit sign, as if Lynn had not seen it. Things were going smoothly, and Lynn was passively acquiescent as he accepted Dad's increasingly intrusive direction. But it wasn't long before Lynn came upon a station wagon motoring along in the left lane. It wasn't going the speed limit. "Do you see that guy? He's not supposed to be in the left lane if he's going that slow. The sign says, 'Slower traffic, keep right.' He's not obeying the rules of the road." Dad's tone was resentful and a bit antagonistic. "Lynn, we're going to make him get over. Slow down and match his speed." Lynn looked over at Dad incredulously, wondering if he was serious, but easing off the accelerator in the process. "Yeah, stay back just enough for him to get over into the right lane, but don't allow enough room for another vehicle to pass him." The jovial singing from the back seat suddenly fell silent as the seeds of a developing confrontation began to take root. Lynn did as instructed as the two cars barreled down the interstate, the Adams family sedan shadowing the station wagon mile after mile. Dad offered some encouragement. "You're doing fine. Stay right where you are. He'll get over when he realizes he's going too slow." Lynn's uneasiness with his role in the conflict began to show. "Dad, why don't we just pass him? Maybe he'll see he's going too slow if someone passes him on the right." "Stay right where you are. We'll get him over." Dad was resolute as he looked over his left shoulder. He saw a brand new silver-blue Cadillac approaching swiftly from behind. A sly smile crept over Dad's face. "You're doing fine right where you are." The speedometer needle was on 55 miles per hour, mirroring the speed of the station wagon. The Cadillac pulled up briskly behind the station wagon and alongside the Adams family sedan. The driver was a little old lady with blue hair, dressed neatly and smoking a cigarette. She appeared to be the wealthy type, used to having her way in society. She never once glanced over at the six faces staring at her from the family sedan. All she saw was the station wagon just a few feet in front of her, with no way around it. Lynn began to ease off the accelerator, attempting to withdraw from the situation. "Speed up! Don't let her around him!" Dad was rabid in his insistence as Lynn sped up and back into position. The old lady was growing more impatient by the second, as she honked and mouthed some sort of profanity, followed by more honking as she took a deep draw from her ash-laden cigarette. The station wagon began to speed up. "Stay with him! Don't let up until he's going faster than 65 miles per hour." The three cars all sped up together as if tethered by some invisible cable. More honking ensued, followed by more profanity as they charged down the road. The tension was thick among the children, their wide-open eyes still glued to the old lady driving the Cadillac, wondering what might happen next. The driver of the station wagon began looking toward the right lane, perhaps noticing the family sedan for the first time. Then, a sudden burst of black smoke erupted from the tailpipe, and the station wagon rocketed forward and swung into the right lane in front of the family sedan. The little old blue-haired lady followed suit, honking and shaking her fist at the station wagon as she sped on by and out of sight. The battle of wills was over. The family would arrive safely at the Poto High School reunion for the class of 1951. Dad would meet old friends and enjoy the compliments about his beautiful family, never once considering the influence of his dangerous game on a young driver, nor the peril it posed to his family. Ironically, he would teach traffic school for more than 20 years, extolling the virtues of defensive driving while preaching against the perils of road rage.